Good evening, everybody. Eric from Dead Tech here, and I realized that whether or not it's evening depends entirely on when you're watching this video, but as you can see from the dark surroundings here, it is evening for me, so I'm going to roll with that. What I am going to do here today is the first video edition of the Reader Question Roundup. For those of you who are not longtime readers of my blog, the Reader Question Roundup is when instead of answering one reader question, I read a few. Like, that probably didn't need as much explanation as it just did. So I'm going to be answering a number of reader questions here in this video. Now, the next thing you're probably wondering is why video and why not the normal thing that I do with my blog, which is to write blog posts. So let me explain a little bit about that, and in so doing, hopefully also explain why I've been a bit lax about cadence lately. As those of you know who have stuck with the blog for a number of years, or even coming to it relatively recently, it's sort of the intersection of topics related to software development and consulting. And that makes sense because I spent a lot of years as a software engineer, and then probably almost as many years as a consultant, consulting in the world of software engineering and doing training around software engineering. And so it's been a long career of consulting and of software. And those are the topics that wind up on the blog. These days, however, as I wrote in a blog post maybe a year ago, I don't really do either much software writing or much consulting anymore. So every now and then I take a consulting gig. Every now and then I have occasion to write a bit of software. But mostly what I do is run a marketing company, which is hit subscribe. So when it comes to content on Dead Tech, I still love writing and I enjoy the subject matter, but my well is running just a little bit dry, I guess, of software/consulting topics, at least until I have occasion to do a little more software or consulting. Now, the other thing is I kind of eat, sleep, and breathe blog posts, since Hit Subscribe is a company with a bunch of folks writing for us, and we're doing technical blog posts for dev tool companies' sites. So there is an element too of I kind of do blogs all day. Long and short of it is, I have no intention of shutting down the Dead Tech blog or anything, but I don't quite have the same, I guess, level of backlog or enthusiasm, if you will, for writing all the blog posts. So I'm kind of hoping, switching it up. I've been getting, for the purposes of the business, into video content a little bit lately. My hope is that doing some videos will kind of help spur the creative juices again, be a fun change of pace. Plus, I have this enormous backlog of reader questions over the last few years. So I think what I might do is just kind of a gonzo trip through them, starting from the oldest to kind of clear things out a little bit and make it so that I don't... I have stuff from 3 years ago. So anyway, that's enough explanation. Let's just dive in. Hopefully this will be sort of fun. So yeah, I'm just going to pop these from the bottom of my Trello board and sort of see what I have to say on the matter. Without further ado, let's look at the bottom one on the list. This says Distributed Operating System. That's the title that I gave it. I'm looking at a Trello card here. The question is, what should be the language of choice for you if you have to recreate the functionalities of a pre-existing distributed operating system? And how fast can you make this distributed OS up and running? In other words, what should be the earliest delivery duration? With libraries, compilers, linker, loader, and other things you would include in making the system, any insight or suggestion would be great. Okay, this question was asked in 2016, so hopefully you've graduated from your CS program by now. I'm sorry, but that just kind of seems like, can you help me with my homework? So gosh, I don't know. If I were going to reinvent that particular wheel, I would probably use the language of that wheel, which I'm guessing would be C++, if I'm handling hardware interrupts and kernel scheduling and all that. The last time I did stuff like that was a programming lifetime ago, kind of in the mid-2000s. But C and C++ worked pretty well then. That's probably what I'd go with again. As for how fast I could get a distributed OS up and running, I have no idea. Hashtag no estimates. Tough to forecast. Probably 2 days. I'm just kidding. All right. So I guess the main question here, I don't know, philosophically, like, I think, especially when you're learning, and assuming this was maybe a computer science curriculum type question, it's kind of great to reinvent these types of wheels as a way to like learn what came before you. I think anybody who's been in a CS 4-year program, maybe even a boot camp, has probably written like an HTTP server, an FTP server. Good to do that stuff. I would have literally zero interest in writing a distributed operating system. I don't tend to look at situations where 5 or 6 different things have solved the problem before me and say, you know what, I'm going to do that, but slightly better. Anyway, not to be flippant, but yeah, C++. All right, I'm going to archive that card. Let's see. How do I use Trello? Let me see if I can wing this, for the sake of video, and maybe I'll cut it out if this doesn't like go quite as well. I forget who asked this, but this is a pretty interesting question. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you, I'm creating this out of frame. I'm going to show you the way I would create 2 different boards. This is like the very entry-level version of how I personally run Trello. So how do I create a board? There we go, create a board. I'm going to call this board today's stuff, and I'm going to bring it in frame. So there we have it. Here is, let me get rid of this. Here is what my daily Trello looks like in good Kanban fashion. I have to do, doing, done. I have a thing called backlog. That's where I capture things that I want to remember but don't know exactly what day I'm going to take them on. I also have blocked and parking lot. So these are my daily Trello columns, and so I'll put any number of things in here, like delivering client blog post, or go to the post office. So each day I build out a backlog. I do have a series of labels I give it to these, and then I put my face on any that are particularly important. Like that one looks kind of important. I call those my kind of big things for the day. That'll make sense here in a minute. And so all the critical stuff for the day, usually there'll be like 3-4 things, because if all 20 things on your day's list are critical, nothing's really critical. So it's a few things where if I don't do these, I'd consider the day a failure. So there'll be things on here too, like that I want to do in life, exercise. I have a lot of recurring tasks that go on here. I also put meetings in here with a special label because those are blocks of time. And what I do throughout the day is simply, in typical Kanban fashion, I'm trying to do 1, maybe 2 of these things at a time, depending. And then I move them over to done. I do these in serial. If I remember, I've got to pay the bills, and I know I need to do that, but I'm not going to do it today, I will put it in backlog. If it's Sunday and the post office is closed, I might move this to blocked. Anything that has just kind of sat in the backlog for a long time might move to parking lot, and then eventually punt it out of the parking lot, because if I haven't done it for weeks, it's probably not worth doing. So this is day over day. This kind of is similar. I have to do, doing, done, and then I have a column called next week, which is kind of like backlog, but this is specifically things that I know I need to do the next week. Anything longer than next week, I have another series of boards where I kind of capture broader projects. Things that are more than a week out sit on those boards. I won't go into all those. This is a similar concept, except I do have one other column that I put in here called goals this week. And this goes kind of over here at the left. So I might have a theme like I have ongoing kind of goals that I'm chasing. So I might have something like increase hit subscribes, monthly recurring revenue as a goal. And what I do at the beginning of each week is kind of based on what my goals are. I create a series of tasks, and I don't really plan out my week in a ton of detail, but I'll create maybe 20 big tasks in here, do outreach to 5 prospects or something. So I start to build out these tasks. I put my face on them so they remind me. I will label and categorize them, but basically I build these out as a backlog for the week. And then each morning, this backlog here informs today. So I'll look and say, okay, here's my day. I've got these meetings. I've got these things going on. But I think I have this backlog of important tasks for the week. I think I could take on these 3. And then it's the same kind of stuff. I'll move this into doing, and then over to done when it's done. Usually this is where I'm at all day, moving things over to done. Then at the end of the day, I'll move everything I've accomplished over into done here. This is kind of my core usage of Trello. I have a lot of backlog, project things, other Trello boards where I'm collaborating, lots of places where I capture stuff that I need to do. But this is kind of like my core way of using Trello to manage my time week in and week out. All right. With that one in the books, let's go ahead and archive that card. Next question is aspect-oriented programming and logging. In a post you wrote, you said that was followed by the great AOP refactoring of 13 when logging code was removed from me for a much... Oh, I remember this post that I wrote. It was a post on the Independent blog a lot of years ago. Anyway, this probably caused the reader to just think of this, but he was saying, I would love you to elaborate on this topic since I am about to face the task of sprinkling log slime all over my growing application, and I would hate to do it the wrong way. So it sounds like as of early 2016, so this is literally about 3 years ago, this reader was interested in knowing, I guess, my take on sort of the right way to do aspect-oriented programming, vis-a-vis as it relates to having a lot of, boilerplate code that handles things like logging. I'm a little hesitant to weigh in on this except in the abstract, simply because I have not been the architect for an application for a long, long time. So the idea of weighing in on important coding decisions for your code base that I won't have to live in is something I want to be very careful of. But I'm just saying, like, if this were me, I really, really don't like, number one, kind of like brainless boilerplate logging code, like I'm entering this method, I'm exiting this method. Like, there are other ways, probably that don't involve your own application code or aspect-oriented programming necessarily, that you can start to instrument production code to give you back information that lets you do traces and debugs. There are tools out there, so lean on those tools. Aspect-oriented programming is something that I'm pretty leery of on the whole. I have used it to great effect over the course of time, but philosophically, aspect-oriented programming, for the simple reason that, like, the way that source code has existed from time immemorial is that you have your source code in your repo, and you have a compiler with a certain version, and the compiler takes that code and turns it into something that you deploy. And that is kind of like in the, to use a metaphor from programming, which is a little weird, but it's like a side effect free function. So the source code is the input, the program is the output, the compiler is kind of an input. So the compiler plus source code is always going to produce the same thing every time. When you introduce aspect-oriented programming, you take things out of the source code because they're repetitive, which is good. I mean, it's kind of a bummer to clog your source code with repetitive boilerplate. You take that out of the source code, and then what happens is you take your source code, you compile it, and kind of part and parcel with that compiling program, you inject some magic, and then you have something in production that you can't actually create from your own source code. That is a fundamentally weird situation. It makes you very reliant on black magic going into your application code as part of your deployment pipeline. Very powerful, but it can get really nasty and hard to debug. So that's a lot of doom and gloom. I mean, logging boilerplate is a bummer. It's side effects all over your code base. It makes your code hard to test. It has all kinds of not great effects. You can mitigate this with inversion of control. You can mitigate this by injecting a logger, by using inheritance schemes and design patterns. You can also do it with object-oriented programming, aspect-oriented programming. It don't have a one-size-fits-all solution. So I guess how would I go about it? Don't sprinkle slime all over your code base. Try to minimize the calls to the logger. Make them as strategic and detailed as possible. Don't err on the side of providing actionable information coming out of your application, but don't, put crap all over your code base. Be leery of aspect-oriented programming. Please don't do things like code generation for this. Use tooling where you can that instruments your code, maybe in production. Some of that may be a little bit of conflicting or fuzzy advice, but the world is full of trade-offs when it comes to programming. I guess that's all I can really say, especially 3 years later. The next one is CodeRush for Roslyn. Hi, Eric. This is also from about 3 years ago. I've been reading your blog for a while, and I really enjoy the content you put out every week. Thank you, sir. I did have one question. I know you are a CodeRush user, and wondering if you've had the opportunity to try CodeRush Roslyn and what your thoughts are on it. If not, how do you handle writing or reviewing code in the original CodeRush where the latest C# features are not supported and show up as errors? Pretty sure this problem is taken care of. Don't have a lot to say about that. I think so I'm still using DevExpress's CodeRush to this day. Actually, if you look in the info little thing at the top right of this video, you can check out, I actually did a video for Hit Subscribe about installing CodeRush. So I definitely still use it when I do some programming. But I think they've merged the Roslyn version and the regular. I don't actually honestly know. But all of this seems to have gone away. I think we've gotten over the Roslyn hump, and life is good in DevExpress land. So I'm going to go ahead and archive this. That was a good question. I wish I had answered it 3 years ago. My apologies for that. As you can see, IOE readers a lot of answers to a lot of questions. I appreciate you asking me so many. Then here we have the last one that I should probably do appropriately enough. Coding is all about trade-offs. How do we coders manage trade-offs effectively? So this is exactly what I was talking about in the logging aspect-oriented programming question. If you want to have a lot of black magic, you can have some really clean code. If you want to avoid black magic and have really clean code, then you don't do much logging, but then you don't have a lot of information at runtime. On the fly here, I'm trying to think of, I guess, general advice for how I handle trade-offs in programming. There's a lot of overlap beyond programming and into things like business too. I think the best advice that I could offer, say in programming, is not to be dogmatic about stuff. So if you hear me or someone else say, aspect-oriented programming is an anti-pattern or something, be leery of advice like that. Most things have use. Even something that I would almost universally say you should avoid, like global state, that can have a tactical, targeted, focused use, in the right context. Please don't go saying I was advising global state. That's almost all downside and very little upside. But the point is, there can be upsides. Everything has its ups and downs, its pros and cons. So the first piece of advice for handling trade-offs is to kind of be leery of dogma and to understand that people are making decisions typically that are relatively intelligent and make sense in the moment. Like, people have a rationale for things. So if something's out there and it's been done as a practice, it's not because people are stupid. It's because usually there are arguments to be made for a practice. So if you avoid dogma and you kind of look at each thing on its merits, you start to kind of gain an understanding of, if I do this, like if I use global state, I'm going to pay a price in the following ways. Like, they'll have downstream maintenance issues, my code will be hard to reason about, etc. So you start to understand these trade-offs in your head, and I wouldn't suggest anything maybe quite as pedestrian as the old pros and cons list. But if you kind of develop an intuitive understanding of these trade-offs and you can just mentally catalog them, then you can start to almost pattern match, like you're a chess player where you recognize board sequences. And if the world calls for this scenario, like if you know that you're going to be putting something into production that is going to have to generate an awful lot of data to be mined about its runtime behavior, then maybe you're making that trade-off where, okay, I'm gonna live with sprinkling a lot of logger code throughout the application. That's not ideal. I will inject the loggers into all these classes. It'll be a bit of a maintenance headache, but I know that a lot of people are depending on this application generating a lot of runtime data to be stored in logs. So in your world, that's an acceptable trade-off because you understand, perhaps the unique needs of your situation. And the reason I'm kind of talking about an example like this is it's all too easy to go on Stack Overflow or to listen to people like me talk and say, here is the right way to do it. There's a lot of, in the software industry, like, here is the way to do it. But the people giving that advice are either giving it from their own world where they're working in their own applications, or they're giving it with like no context at all. And it's just sort of context-free floating aphorisms, like write solid code. These are relatively easy things to say, and they're often good advice, but they're not universally good advice. Very few people have lived your code base. I've seen a lot of code bases over the years because that's the nature of like doing a lot of the kind of specialized assessments that I've done. But if you think about it, a lot of the people you'll bump into in your travels as a programmer, even if they've been in the workforce for 10 years, some of them have spent 5 years at a clip, like working on the same application. So there are an awful lot of people with an awful lot of advice that have worked on few enough serious applications that they could count them on one hand. And some of these are the same people that are offering an awful lot of prescriptive advice on, you should name things this way or structure things that way or use this design pattern. So I think pragmatism is the order of the day here in terms of how to handle trade-offs, and being able to articulate, what you're gaining for what you're giving up and kind of match that up with your situation. So I know that's super general. I hope that kind of helps. That seems like a good philosophical note to close on here. So I'm going to wrap it. My hope is that these videos are interesting and helpful. I'm going to probably burn through this huge backlog I have maybe by doing more of these videos over the course of the coming months. I have, like I said, no intention of ceasing to write posts for the Dead Tech blog, but I'd like to maybe vary up the content a little bit, have a bit of fun. Hopefully some of you like it. If you have questions that you think would be conducive to this format, I don't mind adding to the backlog. This isn't a spring cleaning. It's not my goal to clear it out once and for all. I just thought it'd be fun to kind of run through these rapid fire. So put them in the comments of the post, put them in the comments of the blog post I'm writing this in for framing. Put it in the comments of the YouTube video, anywhere you like. Tweet them at me if you please. But you are more than welcome to offer up any questions that you have for me. Let me know what you think of this format too, if this seems appealing, if you'd rather me go back to blogging. It's all good. Interested to hear what you think. Thank you for watching, and look for more of these videos. I will catch you next time.